Good evening, welcome to the Oak Room. My name is Abigail O'Reilly. I'm the Graduate Heritage Officer at Dublin City Council and I'm working alongside the Heritage Officer, Charles Duggan. So thank you for joining us for tonight's lecture by Evie Numen, which is called Silent Teachers to All, Opening the Doors of a Medical Museum. And it's 200 years, I believe, since the facility first opened its doors at Trinity College Dublin. So Evie's talk this evening is the last in a series of lectures that we have held almost every month this year in the Oak Room Heritage Talks, which you can see the full lineup behind me. And with this series, our aim is to amplify different voices, share fresh perspectives on familiar stories, and shed light on those that are less well known. And we also seek to showcase groundbreaking research and new publications that enrich our understanding of Dublin's social, architectural, and cultural heritage. So thanks to everyone who's joined us along the way. And if you've missed any talks from this year or last, they're all available to watch if you scan the QR code there or else on our YouTube channel, Dublin City Heritage. So this series is an initiative of the Dublin City Strategic Heritage Plan 2024 to 29, and it wouldn't be possible without grant funding from the Heritage Council's County Heritage Plan grant scheme. So before I introduce Evie, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge those who've made this evening possible. And firstly, a huge thank you to my colleague, Charles Duggan, Heritage Officer, who unfortunately couldn't be here this evening, but without whom this series just simply wouldn't exist. And I'd also like to express my gratitude to Bernadette Ferguson, who has provided Irish Sign Language interpretation for most of our talks this year, I believe, and who has put a huge amount of effort into making this series accessible to those who are deaf or hard of hearing. So thank you so much. And thank you as well to Jonathan and the VideoWorks team who are here, and they've ensured that all of these talks are available to watch freely and well into the future. So a special thank you, of course, is due to the Lord Mayor, Councillor Ray McAdam, and the wonderful staff of the Mansion House for graciously hosting us here throughout the year in this really historic and wonderful venue. And now on to our speaker. So I'm delighted to introduce Evie Numen. So Evie Numen is a curator of the Old Anatomy Museum of Trinity College Dublin. Since 2018, she's been working on a project to catalogue, conserve, and curate the medical heritage collection of the School of Medicine. She holds a Master of Fine Arts from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and before her current engagement, she held the position of Exhibitions Manager and Designer at the Mutter Museum of the College of Physicians in Philadelphia from 2009 to 2016. And her research interests include 19th century dissection, medical museum practices, and their intersections with end-of-life rituals. So would you please join me in giving Evie a warm welcome to the podium?
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Abigail, and thank you to our interpreter. So just a couple of things, housekeeping things, I suppose. You will be seeing human remains here, photographs of human remains and illustrations. So be mindful of that. If you want to take a moment to leave, that's perfectly fine. There is no judgment whatsoever. And I should also let you know that I'm face blind. So if you've met me before, I had no idea. Everyone is new every time, so I actually had no idea who you were. So without further ado, let me start you off from this talk. 200 years ago, as of this past Saturday, the professor of anatomy at Trinity College Dublin, James Macartney, gave his inaugural lecture at the new School of Medicine buildings. And he says, a very long lecture, it's something like 20 pages long, he says, if we reflect coolly for one moment, we must admit that employing the body in the communication of useful knowledge and preserving its parts with care and respect for the purpose of transmitting this knowledge to posterity ought to be more agreeable to every person's feelings than casting the body into the earth or into the water, broiling it in the fire, exposing it to be devoured by beasts and birds of prey, or depositing in vaults to putrefy and molder away, or even embalming it. Why is he talking about this? This is his first lecture to the medical students in his new building. Now, who is he? Let's just go back to that for a moment. James Macartney was born in Armagh in 1770, And here he's pictured with his beloved dog, Miller. Miller's bones are now in Cambridge, and that's a whole other story that I will get into. He is a radical. He's a United Irishman, and he actually organizes the United Irishman chapter in the county, and he's also an Irish volunteer. And when he applies for the professorship of anatomy at Trinity College Dublin, he's met with a lot of resistance. He is actually a Presbyterian, but he is seen as a radical, as a Republican, and as a potential source of conflict and challenge for the university. However, he's so well loved by his colleagues, and he's so demonstrably knowledgeable and accomplished that they cannot say no to him. So he gets employed by Trinity in 1813. Now, at this time, the Trinity Medical School is located in this tiny little building with the two chimneys that you see in the back next to the old library, the long room. It's this little building here. And by 1823 or so, Macartney starts to get really annoyed with the state of it. He writes to the provost and says, I have brought you 200 medical students from the 20 you had when we started. And right now I have to lecture in classes that are so small and in a building that's so decrepit that it's actually caving in. The floors are collapsing under the weight of my popularity. And this is the kind of confidence we should all aspire to. And he's not wrong entirely. He's also dealing with a not great dissection hall and a not fantastic museum space. This is the only depiction we have of the 1711 medical museum building, and that's the first medical museum in Ireland. And you'll see some familiar faces or skulls, so to speak, later on. But he's just displeased. And he says, look, you have this fantastic, beautiful museum, the regular TCD museum that encompasses natural history and ethnography and history itself, and it's in this beautiful museum building. I need a better space. And before we get to this part, I just want to reiterate the content advisory here, but I want to add the following, that I want you to have an open mind, to consider that perhaps the body is not just a gruesome sight. It's not gross. It's not disgusting. It can absolutely be upsetting. It can be disturbing, perhaps, in its state. But our bodies and death itself is all part of the human experience. So with that in mind, I want you to go back in time. This is the 1820s, and the kind of images that we see in popular media about medical students and about doctors are not very flattering. So you have this illustration here of basically corvids, carrion, dissecting the body of another of their species. And it's depicting medical students. It's really showing you what people in the 1820s thought of dissection and the business of anatomy. Now, again, they're not very far off. Anatomy had to be done only in the winter months, dissection that is, because of decomposition. And we had to deal with the realities of the decomposing body. However, this was the only way to learn about the human body. You had no way to look inside the body, no MRIs, no CAT scans, no X-rays. And X-rays, by the way, don't happen until 1896. So this is a big chunk of time where we can't see the body unless we're opening it. And you don't want to be opening the body while the person is alive and you're trying to help them without knowing what you're looking at. Now, Macartney, to go back to his plans about the museum and the medical school, he says, look, maybe we can use the printing house for my collection, or maybe we can build a beautiful neoclassical building with columns such as the one that you see there, kind of looking like the building on College Green, and here's how I want it laid out, and so forth. And he finally, in August of 1824, he gets this key, and he's like, okay, I have fought so hard to get into this building, let alone to get them to build it, that I can't wait to see what it's like. I need to inspect it. I need to make sure that it's up to standard. And for some reason, he's not allowed to get in the building, to the point where he actually gets into a fight with the architect that results into Macartney breaking his umbrella on the guy's head. He was a character, let's just say. Somehow, I guess because he's very accomplished and he has the love of his students, he does not get fired over this. The key, however, opens these set of buildings as if drawn by a child. And he goes in and says, this is absolute nonsense. This is not up to par. And the roof is leaking. The place is not properly designed. Nothing is up to my specifications. And I can see now why they wouldn't actually even let me in the building. He's not wrong, because again, these buildings are so decrepit, really, not very well designed at all. They are demolished, and then the School of Medicine gets a new set of buildings in 1886. So our state now is one museum, Macartney's museum, from 1825, from one of these original little 6 buildings that remains, and then a dissection hall and lecture theater that dates back to 1886. And you see the buildings as they were in 1933, the museum, and then the other 2 spaces are from 1886. So you have the dissection hall and the lecture theater. And the dissection hall is a very active space. It's equipped to allow the retention and the education of students in the best way possible. So they're not only using dissection cadavers to learn from, but they're also using illustrations. So you see them all around the walls. They are using specimens, so they have a good dissection to refer to and know what kind of structures they're looking for while they're dissecting. This is the dissection hall after 1947. It is currently occupied by botany, and we cannot wait for them to leave. Soon, supposedly soon. And the reason that happened is because in 2011, the staff of anatomy was told that they have to leave. They have to go to yet another new building on Peer Street, the Trinity Biomedical Sciences Institute. And you see here to enjoy the state-of-the-art facilities that we would expect in the 21st century. Now, while the process was going on, the staff started opening doors and storage spaces and finding this incredible collection that dated back to 1711, that the man that redesigned the space to be mid-century modern, and I have thoughts about that, Cecil A. Erskine, he did not like the museum. He did not like the collection. He thought it was outdated. 1947, he comes in and says, look, this is not up to par. This is not what we want. We don't want the Victorian aesthetic. We want out with the old and in with the new. So he packs everything. This is the museum in its state in 2016. And you see here that everything is, of course, a mess because the staff is trying to catalog the boxes and boxes and tea chests and, files that they are coming across from storage spaces under the lecture theater. So what have we found? What do we know about this collection now? I have been working with the staff in anatomy, my colleague Siobhan Ward, who's the other full-time staff, the one other full-time staff on this project, to catalog the collection, to really see what it consists of. And it does consist of artwork, books, archives, artifacts, ephemera, and specimens. And when we talk about specimens, we usually mean human and animal remains that have been prepared in such a way to demonstrate particular structures or particular pathologies. So an individual has intervened in the preservation of the remains and arrested it to make sure that centuries later they can be with us. This is the museum in 2020 or so. And this is the museum now. So we're making progress. We have new cases. We're getting new lighting, and we're using every bit of space to invite people back in the space. Now, the museum collection was never actually open to the public. It was only collected and assembled and curated for medical students and researchers. So now we have the challenge of changing that and allowing the public to learn about the human bodies that we all have. And medical education, as you know, in the non-collegiate level is not really what it should be. We don't really have anatomy classes that we can refer to other than a few sessions, perhaps in biology class, unless you go into medicine. So medicine and medical knowledge is gate-kept. But there are simple things that we can understand about our bodies that even I can understand about my body as a fine artist, not really a medical doctor at all, that we can communicate and broaden our perspectives, not just about our bodies and our health, but about the variety of the human condition. So what is our mission now? What are we trying to do? We're trying to preserve the heritage that is represented in that collection. Again, advance the public understanding of the human condition, and also invite research, not just research from medicine or science, but sociology, history. This is a collection that represents our story. But there is a problem. There is a growing movement to try to remove human remains from display, saying that displaying human remains is disrespectful, that it's not a place for the rest of human remains, it's not a sacred place, and it's not a culturally significant resting place for any of our ancestors on this planet. Now, about 500 years of history will prove this wrong, but I want to respond to this and talk about how we are addressing this very valid concern. What we want to do is look in the past to reconsider end-of-life rituals and the idea of rest, the idea of eternal rest and burial, and bring that into a secular space, into a museum that combines both respect and dignity for the individuals whose remains we are in care of, but also tells their story through those remains. So we would like to be able to answer questions, and again, about our bodies, public health, vaccines, pathology, infectious diseases, you name it. And we want to also confront the past and talk about the more difficult narratives in history many of which are found in the realm of medicine. We want to push boundaries. We want to have the difficult conversations that can bring greater understanding and also dispel myths and disinformation. We're talking about pathology and vaccines, and we all know that this is a very real concern right now, where disinformation and misinformation is overtaking the narrative. And finally, we also want to talk about death. We cannot talk about health without talking about something that will unfortunately befalls us all, and I hope this is not a spoiler for you. Now, how do we do that? What you see here are two skulls of individuals that suffered from syphilis. Syphilis being a very infectious, very damaging disease that was rife in Dublin. And these two individuals are from different time periods. We don't know who they are, but we have an opportunity to figure that out by perhaps looking at other collections and our own collection that have depictions of individuals in life with syphilitic sores and see, can we match the patterns that we see here? Could we possibly, if not attach an identity, but attach a living face to the remains? This is also very important in terms of public education, because the graph you see there is the rise of cases of syphilis in 2022. We had 200 cases here in Ireland, and we actually had a public health emergency declared, which you may not have heard of in the midst of all the COVID. We think that this may have happened because of COVID, because of the lockdown and people not wanting to go to the hospital to address an STI because they didn't want to get COVID. So instead, they passed it on to others. We also have stories of individuals represented that have conditions that are extraordinary, that you wouldn't necessarily see in life. And if you were to see them in life, you would be very, perhaps, shocked. So the individual that I'm showing you a portrait of here is Cornelius McGrath. He was born in Tipperary in 1670. And he died in 1736. And he was an individual that had a very rare condition called acromegaly, which causes the enlargement of limbs. That's what it really means. It also causes the enlargement of heart. And gigantism, which is what you see here, this extraordinary height. This individual was 7'6". And this condition does still affect people today. And it's not very well understood. We don't quite understand the mechanism of it. And individuals that have it argue for the retention and public display of such remains for the purpose of advancing research and increasing public understanding. So if they are to walk down the street, they don't have to explain themselves. We're doing that for them. They don't have to burden themselves with that burden of education to people that may just be ignorant, not out of their own fault. And such an individual is Brendan Holland, a man with gigantism from the north of Ireland, or I should say North Ireland, sorry, Northern Ireland. And he visited this skeleton of Cornelius McGrath and had that kind of connectedness with history. We also can, very, very practical terms, help others with extremely rare conditions that are represented in the collection. What you see here is the skeleton of William Clark and an illustration of the skeleton of an unnamed woman. They both suffered from the same condition called FOP, fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. I'm sorry about the words. Fibrodysplasia used to be called myositis ossificans. That means ossification of the muscle. In 1970, that was changed to fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, progressive displacement of fiber, not just muscle, joints, tendons, what have you, not skin, not viscera, by ossification, by that tissue turning into bone progressively. So these individuals suffered with a lot of pain, and they suffered with progressive loss of mobility. Now, this condition affects about 900 people in the world. It's extremely difficult to diagnose because very few people know about it. Luckily, a little girl in 1872 was the patient of a physician that was friends with this man here, Edward Halloran Bennett. And the physician said to Bennett, look, I have a patient, she's 11 years old. She has these kind of strange growths on her back, these weird bumps, and they are hard to the touch, they're not movable, and she almost seems to have grown them overnight. Is this cancer? What do I do? Remember, this is before x-rays. The only way to diagnose this by someone that doesn't know what they're looking at is by cutting into the body. Unfortunately, cutting into the body is what brings on these progressive flare-ups of bone ossification trauma. So Bennett said, stop. Don't in any way cut into this girl, don't perform surgery, don't do a biopsy, because that will make her worse. I know what this is. I have seen it in the collection of the museum in Trinity that I happened to be the curator of at the time. And here is the story of these two individuals that we have. And I hope that that little girl had a slightly better quality of life just because of that intervention and because of that connectedness with individuals that lived 100 years before her. Now, that's very important specifically for FOP sufferers to this day, because even vaccination can cause a flare-up. So these are one of the few cases of children that should not be vaccinated. Oops. Oh, and you see here how we can contribute to not only the health of patients, but also the advancement of research. So research has happened in this very rare condition. The gene for it was discovered in just 2016. And as of a few months ago, I'm able to say that there is now a treatment for it, which is, again, 2024, right? Absolutely a very old condition. The first case of it goes back to the 1500s. There is potentially a case that is traced back to Egyptian times. So this is not in any way a new thing, but it's so rare that progress has been very slow. Now, that's all well and good, but we can't talk about the goods of medicine without talking about the way we got here. Absolutely, anatomy, the study of anatomy and the study of medicine itself is rife with very dark histories, and that include things like grave robbing, or even phrenology and eugenics, the idea that we can learn about someone's moral fortitude by studying their skull. What you see there is a photograph of anthropologists measuring the heads of individuals in Inishbofin in the west of Ireland. And you may have heard of this case. So we were very much involved with the research and return of the Inishbofin skulls. There were, by the way, only partial skulls, just the top of the head, and any images you saw online, except for this one, were not of the Inishbofin skulls, which is very frustrating to me. In any case, these skulls not only were returned and buried, but they also, that whole episode spared a lot of new research. Now, you see here, it says stolen remains re-entered on Inishbofin. These remains were not actually ever buried. They were part of an ossuary. And this is where the research bit comes. So Ireland, much like many other Catholic countries, and actually Protestant countries as well, had a tradition of ossuaries. And that is a dedicated space where the skulls of the deceased members of the community were displayed in the church. People were able to pray to them, and they were able to visit them and connect with the past members of their history. And we see very, very few examples of that here in Ireland. Why? Because of the dissolution of the monasteries and the suppression of Catholic rituals by colonial powers. So that was a force of oppression, because they harken back to the idea that we shouldn't be separated from the realm of the dead. We should be connected to them because they can teach us a very valuable lesson, and that is that we're all going to die. So you better repent while you can. Get to it. So what you see here are depictions of primary burial, where individuals are buried in the ground for a short period of time until the bones are the body is decomposed enough to exhume and then preserve the skull and long bones. So you know the pirate symbol, that's where that comes from. This is one of the few, if only photograph I really have found of an ossuary in Ireland. Some of them in the past were quite organized. They were beautifully arranged, and some of them were disorganized spaces like this. So this is Charnel House, an ossuary that's more disorganized in Cong Abbey. Next to it, you see a woman that's holding the top of someone's skull. What is that story? This dates back to 1943. That story is an example of that connectedness, the access to the bodies of the dead. Why? Because this particular bishop's skull was thought to cure illnesses such as tuberculosis or whooping cough in this case. How would that happen? Individuals, cunning women usually, would prepare potions for sufferers, and they would incorporate the dust from the bones of the dead. So this is what we call medical cannibalism. Do not try this at home, it does not work. Not that I have tested it personally. So not eating people. Anyway, but you see this photograph in 1943 that shows you that that access to the dead still persisted despite the suppression, despite advancement. Now, a museum like ours can also be an agent for social change. So we're connecting to the past, we're addressing these histories, but what can we do now? What can we do to change things? Macartney was very much grappling with all of these ideas back in 1825. And he actually was accused of receiving a body from grave robbers in 1826. That's a year before the Burke and Hare scandal happens. If you don't know, that's the case of a pair of Irish grave robbers in Edinburgh cutting the middleman and actually killing people to offer their bodies to the anatomy schools. Again, don't try this at home. So Macartney wanted to change that. He was himself accused of this, and he was not murdered, but accepting a body from grave robbers. And he was tried, which is one of the very few cases where we have people in authority actually being brought to task. But he was found innocent. Whether or not he was innocent, we don't know. He actually accused RCSI of receiving that body. He said, no, I was offered the body, but I didn't take it. I refused it, so our CSI must have taken it. It's a long history of controversy there. And to address this upheaval over dissection and over grave robbing, he said, well, here's the thing. What if we change the story entirely? And instead of having this idea that bodies that are in museums fragmented would keep individuals from resting in peace and going to heaven and all that, we remind people that, first of all, the Catholic Church and the Church in general does not in any way accept this as dogma. So God is all powerful. He can assemble you back. Your body doesn't matter. It's your soul that we're concerned with. Not we. I'm not involved in this. So this is a popular cartoon. So let me just go this. The scroll that you see here is a petition of individuals pledging to donate their body to science. This is 1828. It has 314 signatures on it. And it basically says, we recognize these are prejudices that exist, and we want to change that. We want to show that not just poor people being affected by this, not just executed criminals should be the source of bodies for dissection, but people like you and me. So it's 314 individuals from the higher strata of society, including Peter Hennis Green, the founder of The Lancet. He was partially inspired by this, by the case of James O'Connor. James O'Connor was his student, and in 1827, he willed his body to Macartney. And he said, in the name of God, amen, I bequeath my soul to God, my body to Dr. Macartney of Trinity College for inspection and any other use he may want to put it to, requesting that he will leave notice on the lung and ear. He did have tuberculosis, so this was a concern, and Dr. Chain, Sir Arthur Clarke, and Dr. Stokes to attend the inspection meaning the autopsy. And indeed, his body was preserved in Macartney's collection, and his skull was skeletonized and displayed separately from the rest of his body. But Macartney also made preservations of the lungs and the larynx. So it says here, scrofulous deposit, that's tuberculosis, of the larynx and Dr. O'Connor. Now this, however, the skull is in the University of Cambridge. Why? Because Macartney had enough of Trinity, and in 1836, he packed his bags and sold his collection. And this is a time period where the collections belong to the anatomists that prepare them. And he sold his collection to Cambridge. He actually offered the collection to Trinity free of charge, and he was left on red. They never replied to him. So he was ghosted by Trinity, I suppose. He resigned, and now his collection, including this skull, is in Cambridge. And I had the opportunity to visit with Dr. James's skull a few months ago. Now, we thought, up until, again, a few months ago, that the collection was entirely in Cambridge. But the lettering on the skull actually showed us that not only is some of it left behind, but a significant sample of it is left behind. What you see here is what I believe to be the death mask of Dr. O'Connor. He made death masks of him as well. And when I saw the lettering here, I thought, wait, I've seen this before. And I had seen it in these vertebrae of a dolphin that we had in the collection. And I thought, this this looks older than the rest, perhaps. It goes back to the original collection of the college from 1711. I was wrong. It was Macartney's, as are all these specimens that we have identified so far and have been able to trace back to the catalogues that he made. So we have the significant collection by this very prominent Irish anatomist. Now back to this idea, the petition for body donation. It was successful in the sense that he got to collect all these signatures of individuals, but when he presented that to the governing powers in London, they dismissed it. They said, okay, yeah, body donation, great idea, but I don't think this will solve the problem of the shortage of supply of bodies for dissection. And he was not the only case of soliciting such a petition. We found recently, my colleagues and I, just last month really, we found several other cases of petitions by community members from villages, not just higher strata of society, but the average people saying, no, this is really terrible idea to be grave robbing and to have to do that. We understand that medicine is important and we need to study the bodies. We will donate our bodies to you. This is... Fast forward to 1832, the Anatomy Act passes. Up until recently, this was the Anatomy Act that we operated under as Ireland. But unfortunately, it does not involve body donation. It only says that the bodies of those who are unclaimed or those who are too poor, I don't know what happened there, who are too poor to have their bodies buried will go to medical schools. So body donation doesn't actually get organized as a legal path till 1960s here, which is kind of maddening. Now, I'm showing you this skull because this is the other individual, the other first in Trinity. This is the skull of a woman called Madame Barret, and she was a French Huguenot who donated her body to Macartney. So he basically received a large package one day, and it was the body of Madame Barret, along with a letter saying, I would like to donate my body to Dr. Macartney for the advancement of science and understanding and so forth, but please display me in your museum. Unfortunately, again, she's now in Cambridge. Now, there are other issues right now that we're dealing with. We have kind of solved the body donation problem, more or less. But now we're dealing with this rise of misinformation, this rise of far-right ideologies, and actually going back to ideas that are traced back to eugenics. So we have these exaggerated depictions of female and male skulls, these exaggerated depictions of different races, different racial types, and going back to the whole idea that Caucasian race is superior because our heads are bigger. I kid you not that that's the actual premise of eugenics. Our heads are bigger, so we have more brain, therefore we're better. It's not true in any way. And of course, we have very strict ideas about gender being propagated by people that are the gender critical theory proponents. That say, look, you can tell someone's body, you can tell if someone is female or male from their bones. So no matter what they say during life, when we have their bones, we will know for sure. That's not true either. We are so diverse and so different from each other, even within our little groupings, that you cannot necessarily determine sex or race or even age from remains in a way that's determinable, and not even from DNA, but that's a whole other story that I'm not going to get into. And finally, we cannot, as I said, not talk about death when we are dealing with a collection of human remains. A medical museum, unlike any other space, unlike a hospital, unlike a hospice, unlike a funeral home, gives you the opportunity to sit and confront mortality in a way that's not necessarily loaded with personal loss. Of course, it might be, because we all experience personal loss. So when you enter a museum, you might be bringing that into the experience, but it also allows you to sit and actually look at a skull. Really observe what's underneath your skin. And you can only do that in one other place other than museums, and that is churches. Relics are very numerous in Ireland, relics of sainted individuals, including this skull of a Franciscan monk. And this is another case of an ossuary, and I mentioned the ossuaries before. That's also a museum in Bulgaria. And there are many others around Europe that exist that are visitable by the public. And finally, we have the opportunity to have a site of burial and remembrance, an alternate site for burial. Burial does not need to be underground necessarily. And of course, we don't actually call it burial in this case, but the afterlife, the metaphorical afterlife of remains. Ooh. Okay. Sorry for the lipstick. That was part of the template for the talk. What I'm showing you here is an ossuary of a monastery in Greece, where I'm from, and where we still practice secondary burial, this idea of burying the body for a short period of time and then exhuming it to just preserve the skeletonized remains. In the case of monasteries especially, they do remain on display, much like they are in the Mutter Museum, College of Physicians of Philadelphia, where we have a large collection of 148 skulls, all collected of the Caucasian race, to prove this vast variety between individuals that of Caucasian origin. So this man was actually, Dr. Hertel was actually trying to disprove eugenics back in 1840. And then let's also consider, if remains are not on display, how are they kept? How can we ensure dignity and respect for the individuals whose remains are in our care? I think we can do a little better than monasteries. And I'm sorry if that's blasphemous, but here we are. So this is a monk who's holding an ossuary box. And next to that is a box, a storage museum box of remains of a single individual, because it's mark of respect to not commingle remains. In a very carefully arranged box, the remains are cleaned, and you don't have this kind of more disorganized storage place. Also, our museum happens to be consecrated, which I only recently found out, because this plaque is in storage because of ongoing construction. So I never got to see it on site. And it says, this ground is consecrated to the remains of those whose bodies after death have been rendered useful to their fellow creatures. And now the wording is a little problematic, and I think we can do better than that. But he shows you back in 1886 this effort to make sure that people are remembered and they are resting in peace. The lipstick, I don't know. And we can also do that within displays, such as the case of Dr. Cunningham here, Daniel John Cunningham, who was an anatomist in the 1890s, and he very carefully made sure to reassemble the skeleton of Cornelius McGrath. And what I'm trying to show you there are all the little absolutely beautiful wooden replicas that he had created to repair the skeleton, to replace parts of the bones that went missing during the 100 years plus of its afterlife. He also researched Cornelius' story and wrote about him and published his biography. And finally, I want you to consider for a moment an extremely rare case of an individual with perfect health at the age of 106, who, much like David, showing us the other side of life, youth and beauty, and then old age, but perfect health until 106. And I consider his skeleton to be the rarest case in our museum, because most of us will go through life with trauma, with illness, with disability, sooner or later. Again, sorry for the spoiler. This talk is called Silent Teachers for All, and this is a group photograph, a family photograph almost, of the teachers of the medical school. So you have the individuals that have passed a long time before, you have the anatomy demonstrators, and you also have the surface anatomy model, a living man, Jack Biceps Butler, who was there to show students surface anatomy and what they would be looking at, what kind of muscles they would learn and so forth. So thank you so much. Happy to take any questions. And yeah, thank you.